I can't take this marriage anymore. But the final straw wasn't cheating, money, or even fighting. It was something much quieter. I found the spreadsheet on a Sunday morning while looking for our tax documents, not hidden in some encrypted folder or tucked behind a password-protected file. Just sitting there in our shared drive, labeled Household Management 2024. I almost scrolled past it. Almost. But something about the file size caught my attention. It was massive for what should have been grocery lists and utility tracking. When I opened it, my coffee went cold in my hand. 36 tabs, color-coded, cross-referenced, each one documenting a different aspect of our marriage with the clinical precision of a research project. Tab 1, Conversation Topics by Week. Tab 7, Emotional Response Patterns. Tab 15, Intimate Relations Frequency and Duration. She had logged everything. Every single interaction we'd had for the past 3 years, categorized, analyzed, and rated on various scales I didn't understand. There were graphs, pivot tables, conditional formatting that turned certain cells red when my performance metrics dropped below acceptable thresholds. I sat there staring at row 1847, the entry for last Thursday's dinner conversation, and realized I couldn't remember what we'd actually talked about. But according to her notes, I had scored a 6.3 out of 10 for engagement level and received a yellow flag for topic deviation. My name is Daniel Whitmore, and I've been married to Melissa for 8 years. We met in graduate school, both pursuing degrees in different fields, but sharing the same coffee shop between classes. She was getting her MBA while I finished my engineering doctorate. Everyone said we were perfect together, the analytical power couple. We bought a house in Portland 3 years ago, a renovated Craftsman with good bones and better light. No kids yet, but we'd talked about it, vaguely, in the way people talk about future possibilities without committing to timelines. I thought we were happy. Not ecstatic, not passionate in the way movies portray marriage, but content. Stable. The kind of partnership where you know what to expect and find comfort in that predictability. Looking at this spreadsheet, I realized Melissa had been conducting our entire relationship like a longitudinal study, and I was the unwitting test subject. I scrolled through the tabs, my disbelief morphing into something colder. Gift appropriateness analysis tracked every present I'd ever given her, rated on thoughtfulness, monetary value, and alignment with stated preferences. I'd apparently failed Christmas 2022 because the cookbook I bought her was predictable and showed insufficient research into current interests. There was a tab called Social Performance Review that graded my behavior at parties and family gatherings. Another labeled Career Trajectory Concerns, where she'd been monitoring my job performance through some method I couldn't quite decipher, complete with projections for my earning potential through 2035. But the worst one, the one that made my stomach drop through the floor, was tab 33. Relationship Sustainability Assessment. It was a complex formula weighing dozens of factors, updating automatically based on the data from other tabs. At the bottom was a single cell, highlighted in red. Current viability, 43%. Recommend strategic intervention or exit planning. She'd calculated the exact percentage chance our marriage was worth continuing. And I was failing. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She was humming something, probably that podcast she always listened to during her morning yoga routine. I had maybe 30 seconds before she walked into my office. My hands were shaking as I took screenshots on my phone, not even sure why I was documenting this, except some instinct that I'd need proof later. Proof that this was real. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Hey, did you find the tax stuff? Melissa appeared in the doorway, her hair still damp from the shower, wearing the blue sweater I'd once told her I liked. The sweater was probably logged somewhere. Blue sweater, deployment frequency, husband response rating, cost-benefit analysis. Yeah, I managed. Found it. She smiled, that same warm smile I'd fallen in love with 9 years ago, and walked away to start breakfast. I sat there staring at the spreadsheet, at 3 years of my life reduced to data points and performance metrics, and felt something fundamental crack inside my chest. The next few days were a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. I went to work, came home, had conversations with my wife, all while knowing she was logging every word, every gesture, every microscopic interaction into her database of our marriage. I started noticing things I'd missed before, the way she'd pull out her phone after we talked, typing quickly. I'd assumed she was answering work emails. Now I knew she was updating her logs. The little notebook she kept in her purse, I'd thought it was for grocery lists or meeting notes. One night while she was in the shower, I checked. Page after page of shorthand observations about me. Dee seemed distracted during dinner. Eye contact decreased by estimated 40%. Possible work stress or reduced interest in relationship. Monitor. I told myself I should confront her immediately. Demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was morbid curiosity about how deep this went. Maybe it was the creeping fear that confronting her would just become another data point, another test I could pass or fail. So instead, I started my own investigation. I reached out to James Kowalski, an old college friend who'd become a forensic data analyst for a private investigation firm in Seattle. We met for lunch on a Wednesday, at a restaurant far enough from both our workplaces to guarantee privacy. James had put on weight since I'd last seen him, his hairline retreating faster than mine, but his eyes were still sharp behind expensive frames. So your wife is tracking you like a research subject, he said, after I'd explained everything. He wasn't judging, just processing. How long has this been going on? 3 years that I can confirm, but there are references to earlier logs in some of the formulas. She might have physical records going back further. James was quiet for a moment, drumming his fingers on the table. Daniel, I have to ask this. Is there any chance she's doing this because of something you did? An affair? A betrayal? Something that would make her want to monitor you? No. The word came out harder than I intended. I've never cheated, never lied about money, never given her any reason not to trust me. We barely even fight. That might be part of the problem, James said softly. Some people can't handle relationships without control structures, without data to quantify and manage every variable. It's like, he paused, searching for the right words. It's like she's trying to optimize you, to turn marriage into something she can perfect through analysis and adjustment. Can you look at the data? Tell me if I'm overreacting? He agreed, and I sent him everything I'd collected. 2 days later, he called me at midnight, which is when I knew this was worse than I'd thought. Daniel, you need to document everything from this point forward, he said, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. Get a separate bank account she doesn't know about. Start keeping your own records of your daily activities, because if this relationship ends, you need to be prepared for the fact that she's been building a case against you for years. A case? James, we're married. We're not in litigation. Not yet, he said. But look at tab 28 again, the one labeled Asset Distribution Scenarios. I'd skimmed that one, assumed it was just financial planning. But when I opened it with James still on the line, I saw what he meant. She'd created multiple models for divorce proceedings, how assets would split under different circumstances, which scenarios favored her financially. There were notes about fault-based versus no-fault divorce laws in Oregon, projections for spousal support based on various narratives about the marriage's failure. She'd been planning her exit strategy while cooking me dinner and asking about my day. There's something else, James continued. Some of her data sources don't make sense. She's tracking things she shouldn't have access to. Your emails from work, your browsing history, GPS location data that's more precise than phone tracking. Daniel, I think she's installed monitoring software on your devices. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Melissa, watching her breathe in the darkness, and felt like I was sharing a bed with a stranger. Worse than a stranger, an adversary who'd been studying me, cataloging my weaknesses, preparing for some eventual confrontation I hadn't seen coming. In the morning, I told her I had an early meeting and left the house at 6. Instead of going to work, I drove to a strip mall in Beaverton and bought a new laptop with cash. No connection to our shared accounts, no digital trail she could follow. Over the next week, I started building my own documentation, not a spreadsheet. I couldn't bring myself to mirror her methods, but a detailed journal of what I was discovering. I found the spyware on my work laptop, exactly where James said to look, a keystroke logger that had been active for 18 months. I found the hidden camera in our bedroom, disguised as a smoke detector, with a direct feed to her personal cloud storage. I found records of her accessing my therapy sessions. I'd been seeing Dr. Raymond Fisher for mild work-related anxiety. Somehow she'd gotten into the patient portal and read his notes about our conversations. The invasion was total, surgical. She'd turned our entire life into a panopticon, and I'd been too trusting, too comfortable, too stupidly in love to notice. I made an appointment with an attorney, Denise Cartwright, who specialized in complex divorces. Her office was in downtown Portland, all glass and steel, and uncomfortable modern furniture designed to make you feel small. She was in her 50s, with gray hair she didn't bother dyeing, and a reputation for winning cases people said were unwinnable. Mr. Whitmore, she said, after I'd shown her everything I'd compiled. I've been practicing family law for 26 years. I have seen abuse, fraud, manipulation of every variety. But this, she gestured at the printed spreadsheets covering her conference table. This is one of the most comprehensive violations of privacy I've encountered in a marriage. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I want out, I said, but I need to understand what I'm dealing with first. Is this illegal? Can she use this data against me in court? Denise put on her reading glasses and started going through the documents with a highlighter. The surveillance is definitely illegal in Oregon without consent. The spyware on your work devices could expose her to criminal charges. That's felony computer crime territory. The therapy records breach HIPAA regulations, which opens another can of worms entirely. But here's the problem. If you divorce her now, you're going to be fighting someone who's been preparing for this battle for years. She knows every vulnerability you have, every mistake you've made, every moment of weakness she can exploit. So what do I do? She looked at me over her glasses. You prepare better than she did. You find the things she doesn't want found. Because someone this obsessed with control and documentation, they always have secrets they're protecting. Always. I hired a private investigator that same day, Lucas Freeman, recommended by Denise, a former police detective who'd gone private after 20 years with Portland PD. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of face that people forgot easily, a useful trait in his profession. We met in his car outside a grocery store, because he said offices were too easy to bug. Your attorney sent me the preliminary files, Lucas said. I'm going to be honest with you, Daniel. This kind of surveillance behavior doesn't usually exist in isolation. People who monitor their partners this intensively are either paranoid about something specific, or they're projecting their own behavior onto you. We need to figure out which one this is. You think she's hiding something. I think someone this focused on controlling the narrative is usually worried about their own narrative falling apart. He handed me a small device that looked like a USB drive. This is a clean phone, encrypted, no connection to anything in your current digital ecosystem. Use it to contact me, and only me. Don't tell anyone you hired me, not even family. And whatever you do, keep acting normal at home. Can you do that? I said yes, but I wasn't sure it was true. How do you act normal when you know your entire life is being recorded and analyzed? How do you have a conversation with someone when you know they're mentally rating your performance? I went home that evening, and Melissa had made my favorite dinner, salmon with roasted vegetables, prepared exactly the way I liked. She asked about my day. I lied smoothly, telling her about a project at work that didn't exist. She smiled and nodded, and later that night, I saw her updating her spreadsheet. Our conversation had earned me a 7.8, apparently, an improvement from the previous week. I felt sick. Lucas called me 3 days later on the encrypted phone. We need to meet, now. We met at a park, walking the trails like two people who just happened to be exercising at the same time. Lucas handed me a folder without breaking stride. Your wife has been having an affair for the past 14 months, he said quietly, with her business partner, Richard Vaughn. They travel together frequently for work. At least, that's what she tells you. Half those trips aren't business-related. I have hotel records, credit card receipts, photographs. I stopped walking. The folder felt impossibly heavy in my hands. There's more, Lucas continued. The monitoring, the tracking, all of it started about 3.5 years ago, right after she met Vaughn at a conference. My theory? She's been documenting your failures as a husband to build justification for the affair, or maybe to prepare for a divorce where she comes out looking like the victim of a neglectful spouse. Either way, she's been constructing a narrative where you're the problem, and she's the one who tried to make it work. I opened the folder. Photographs of Melissa and a man I recognized from her company events, checking into hotels, having dinner in cities she'd told me she was visiting alone. In one photo, his hand was on the small of her back, and she was leaning into him the way she used to lean into me. How long have you known this? I asked. I confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I told you. Lucas's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. Daniel, I know this is a lot, but you need to use this. She's been playing chess while you thought you were just having a marriage. Now you know the rules of the game. That night, I sat in my car outside our house for an hour before I could make myself go inside. Through the window, I could see Melissa moving around the kitchen, preparing for another evening of performing normalcy while secretly documenting my inadequacies and maintaining her affair. The betrayal was almost incomprehensible in its totality. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the systematic, calculated way she'd been dismantling our relationship while pretending to be invested in fixing it. When I finally went inside, she greeted me with concern. You're home late. Everything okay? Traffic, I said. Another lie. Another data point for her collection. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. I played the role of devoted husband while secretly working with Lucas and Denise to build my own case. We gathered evidence of her affair, documented the surveillance equipment, collected proof of her illegal access to my therapy records and work emails. I opened a separate bank account and quietly transferred half our savings, enough to protect myself, but not enough to trigger alerts in whatever financial monitoring system she surely had. I started keeping my own journal of her behaviors, mirroring her documentation, but with a different purpose. She was building a case against me. I was building a case for the truth. The hardest part was maintaining the illusion at home. Melissa had no idea I knew anything. She continued her meticulous tracking, continued her affair, continued asking me about my day with that concerned expression that I now recognized as performance. We had dinner together, watched television together, had sex occasionally, encounters she probably logged with duration and satisfaction ratings. I felt like I was living in a psychological horror film where the monster wore the face of someone I'd once loved. James called me on a Friday evening. I found something else in the data, he said. Your wife has been corresponding with a divorce attorney for the past 6 months. Nancy Friedman, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the state. They've been strategizing about timing, about how to frame the narrative of the marriage, about maximizing her settlement. Daniel, she's been planning to divorce you, probably within the next few months. This whole thing, the documentation, the affair, all of it, has been preparation. When? I asked. When was she planning to do it? According to the email timestamps I recovered, she was targeting early next year, after the holidays, after your bonus pays out from work. She's been calculating everything down to the optimal moment to extract maximum value while minimizing her own risk. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark window. Outside, Portland was settling into autumn, leaves turning colors that Melissa probably had documented in some spreadsheet about seasonal aesthetic preferences. Inside, my marriage was already dead, had been dead for years apparently, but I'd been too blind to see the corpse. That weekend, Melissa told me she needed to go on another business trip. Chicago, 3 days, strategy meetings with potential clients. I nodded and helped her pack, and as soon as she left for the airport, I called Lucas. She's going to meet Vaughn, I said. This is our chance to get irrefutable evidence. Lucas had already anticipated this. He'd arranged for a colleague in Chicago to document their time together. But more importantly, with Melissa out of the house, we could safely examine her personal devices and spaces without risk of discovery. Denise came with a digital forensics expert, a woman named Patricia Huang, who looked more like a college student than someone with 15 years of experience in computer forensics. We need to be careful, Patricia said, setting up her equipment in Melissa's home office. Anything we find has to be obtained legally, or it's inadmissible. That means we can only access devices and spaces you have joint ownership of. Nothing that's password protected beyond reasonable marital access. We spent 8 hours going through everything. Patricia imaged Melissa's backup drives, recovering deleted files and communications. We found her physical journals going back to the beginning of our relationship. Pages and pages of observations about me, strategies for managing my behavior, notes about how to optimize relationship outcomes. It was disturbing reading. I wasn't a husband to her. I was a project, a problem to be solved through sufficient data analysis and behavioral modification. But the real discovery came when Patricia cracked open an encrypted folder on Melissa's external drive. Inside were financial documents showing she'd been systematically moving money into hidden accounts for the past 2 years. Not huge amounts, just enough that I wouldn't notice the slight decrease in our savings growth. But it totaled over $80,000 that she'd squirreled away in preparation for our eventual split. This is financial fraud, Denise said quietly, examining the documents. She's been preparing to rob you blind while building a case that you're a bad husband who deserves nothing in the divorce. Daniel, this is worse than we thought. On Sunday night, Melissa came home from Chicago, glowing and energized in the way people do when they've spent a weekend with their lover. She kissed my cheek and told me about the successful meetings, the promising clients, the exciting opportunities for her company. Every word was a lie wrapped in enthusiasm. I smiled and asked questions and acted interested, and later that night, I added notes to my own documentation about her performance. 2 could play the documentation game. Lucas called me Monday morning with photographs from Chicago, Melissa and Vaughn checking into the same hotel room, having breakfast the next morning in the hotel restaurant, her hand covering his across the table, walking through Millennium Park like tourists, like lovers, like people who didn't have spouses waiting at home. The evidence was incontrovertible. What's your next move? Lucas asked. I'd been thinking about this question for days. The old Daniel, the one who existed before I found that spreadsheet, would have confronted her immediately, demanded explanations, tried to salvage something from the wreckage. But that version of me had died when I realized my entire marriage was a controlled experiment. The new Daniel understood that this wasn't about saving the relationship. It was about protecting myself from someone who'd been weaponizing our marriage against me for years. I want to control the narrative for once, I said. She's been planning her exit for months, building her case, getting everything in position. I want to move first. I want her to understand what it feels like when someone you trust completely pulls the rug out from under you. Denise scheduled a meeting for the following Wednesday. Just me, her, and the mountain of evidence we'd compiled. She wanted to review our strategy, make sure we had everything documented properly before we made our move. Here's what's going to happen, Denise explained, spreading documents across her conference table. We're going to file for divorce before she does. We're going to submit all of this evidence, the surveillance, the affair, the financial fraud, the HIPAA violations from accessing your therapy records, and we're going to ask for everything. The house, the savings, spousal support if we can get it, and damages for the illegal monitoring. We're going to flip her entire strategy against her. What about criminal charges? I asked. The spyware, the hidden cameras, the data theft from my work computer. That's trickier. The district attorney would have to decide if they want to prosecute. But we can make a police report, get everything on record. Even if they don't press charges, it becomes part of the divorce record. It shows a pattern of behavior that no judge will look kindly on. Patricia, the forensics expert, had prepared a detailed report documenting every piece of illegal surveillance Melissa had conducted. It was over 100 pages long, technical and precise, the kind of evidence that destroyed defenses in court. James had compiled a data analysis showing how she'd manipulated her documentation to create a false narrative about our marriage. Lucas had photographic and financial evidence of the affair that would obliterate any claim she might make about being a faithful spouse driven away by my failures. We had built a case so comprehensive, so devastating, that even Nancy Friedman, Melissa's attorney-in-waiting, wouldn't be able to salvage her position. When do we file? I asked. Friday, Denise said. We file Friday morning. You'll need to move out before she's served. Get your essential belongings, your important documents, anything you can't replace. Do it Thursday night while she's at work. Then stay somewhere she can't find you. Because when she realizes what's happening, she's going to be desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things. I spent Wednesday and Thursday in a state of surreal calm. This was really happening. After 8 years of marriage, after months of discovering the truth, I was finally taking action. I went to work, came home, had dinner with Melissa, acted like everything was fine. She had no idea that in 48 hours, her entire carefully constructed plan would implode. Thursday evening, Melissa told me she needed to work late, finishing a presentation for a Friday morning meeting. Perfect. I waited until she left, then called James and Lucas to help me pack. We worked quickly and quietly, loading my clothes, my books, my personal items into their vehicles. I took my computer, my important documents, things that had sentimental value. I left the furniture, the art, most of the shared possessions. I didn't want anything that would remind me of this house, this marriage, this elaborate deception. As I was doing a final sweep of my office, I found something I'd missed before, a small leather journal tucked behind some books. I opened it to find Melissa's handwriting, but these weren't her usual analytical observations. These were personal reflections, dated entries like a diary. I don't know if I ever loved him, one entry read, from 2 years ago, or if I just loved the idea of who he could become with proper guidance. He's so passive, so content with mediocrity. Richard makes me feel alive in ways Daniel never could. Another entry, more recent. The data doesn't lie. He's a 6 at best, maybe a 7 on good days. I deserve someone who scores in the 9s consistently. Richard is a 9.5. The transition will be painful but necessary. I just need to time it right, make sure I'm protected financially and reputationally. I photographed every page, added it to the evidence file, and left the journal exactly where I'd found it. Let her wonder how we'd gotten so much information. Let her feel the paranoia of not knowing what we knew. By midnight, the house was stripped of my presence. I stood in the doorway one last time, looking at the space that had been my home, and felt nothing. No sadness, no nostalgia, no regret. Just cold clarity that I was escaping something toxic that had been slowly poisoning me for years. I stayed at James's apartment that night, barely sleeping, knowing that tomorrow everything would change. Friday morning at 9, Denise filed the divorce petition along with a request for a restraining order based on the illegal surveillance. By 10, a process server was at Melissa's office, handing her the paperwork in front of her colleagues. By 11, I'd filed a police report about the spyware and hidden cameras, giving Detective Angela Morrison copies of everything we'd documented. My phone started ringing at 11:15. Melissa, calling over and over. I didn't answer. She left voicemails, her voice progressing from confused to angry to panicked. Then texts started coming through. What the hell is this? Call me now. Daniel, this is insane. We can talk about this. You're making a huge mistake. I have evidence too. You won't win this. Please just call me. Let me explain. I blocked her number and waited. Detective Morrison called me that afternoon. Mr. Whitmore, I've reviewed the evidence you submitted. This is definitely criminal territory. Computer crimes, invasion of privacy, potentially identity theft, depending on how she accessed some of these systems. I'm going to recommend the DA pursue charges. Can you come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement? Of course. One more thing, Morrison said. We're going to need to seize her computers and devices as evidence. We'll get a warrant for that. But I want you to know, cases like this, they get complicated when it's spousal surveillance. Sometimes prosecutors don't want to touch them. But what she did to you, the scope of it, that goes beyond typical marital snooping. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she faces consequences. The weekend was a blur of legal activity. Denise filed additional motions based on the financial fraud we'd discovered. Lucas delivered his full investigative report, including the Chicago photographs. Patricia's forensics report was submitted to both the court and the police. We were building a fortress of evidence that Melissa couldn't breach. On Monday, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Whitmore, this is Nancy Friedman. I represent Melissa Whitmore. I'd like to discuss the possibility of mediation before this gets any more contentious. Miss Friedman, I'm represented by counsel. You should speak to Denise Cartwright. I understand that, but I wanted to reach out personally because I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. My client has been documenting marital issues in an attempt to improve the relationship, not to harm you. The surveillance, while perhaps overzealous, was motivated by concern for the marriage. I almost laughed. She was having an affair while documenting my failures. She stole money from our joint accounts. She illegally accessed my medical records and installed spyware on my work computer. None of that was motivated by concern for our marriage. There was a pause. We have our own documentation that paints a very different picture of events. I'm sure you do, but documentation manufactured to support a predetermined narrative isn't evidence, it's fiction, and unlike my wife, I have actual, verifiable proof of everything I'm claiming. So no, Ms. Friedman, there will be no mediation. There will be discovery and trial if necessary, and your client will be lucky if she avoids criminal charges. I hung up and immediately called Denise to tell her about the contact. Good, Denise said. She's scared. That means they know they're in trouble. Nancy doesn't reach out for mediation this early unless her client's position is weak. We keep pushing. The divorce moved forward with brutal efficiency. Discovery revealed even more than we'd initially known. Melissa had been documenting our marriage since we started dating, 9 years of observations, assessments, and strategic planning. She'd created detailed profiles of my family members, analyzing them for potential influence in a divorce scenario. She'd researched my employer's policies on spousal support and employment contracts. She'd consulted with a therapist, not for marital counseling, but for advice on how to document a spouse's mental health issues to use in custody disputes, even though we had no children. The level of premeditation was staggering. Richard Vaughn's wife, Amanda, contacted me in November. She'd found out about the affair after the divorce filing became semi-public through mutual professional connections. She was filing for divorce too and wanted to coordinate our cases since our spouses had been collaborating in their deception. They deserve each other, Amanda said when we met for coffee. She was a pediatric nurse, warm and straightforward, nothing like the calculating persona Melissa had perfected. I found Richard's notes about exit strategies. He and Melissa have been planning to end both marriages and move in together once the divorces were final and the financial settlements secured. They were playing us both. How long have you known? I asked. 2 months. I hired a private investigator after Richard started acting weird. Turns out he'd been having affairs before Melissa, but she's the one he decided to trade up for. The investigator found emails between them discussing timelines, coordinating their divorce filings so they'd both be free at the same time. It was like reading a business plan for relationship fraud. We compared notes, shared evidence, realized that Melissa and Richard had been even more calculated than either of us had initially understood. They'd created a joint 5-year plan that involved divorcing us, combining their professional resources to start a new company, and building a life together on the financial and emotional wreckage of their abandoned marriages. The district attorney's office decided to prosecute Melissa on multiple charges in January: computer crimes, illegal surveillance, identity theft for accessing my work systems under false pretenses. The lead prosecutor, Michael Bennett, was a 15-year veteran who told me he was taking the case because he was tired of seeing people abuse trust and technology to victimize their partners. A lot of times, spousal surveillance gets dismissed as a domestic issue, Bennett explained during our meeting. But your wife crossed every line. She didn't just snoop through your phone or check your browser history. She installed malware, created comprehensive surveillance systems, stole medical records, infiltrated your work computer. That's not a jealous spouse. That's a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of marriage. The trial was set for March. But before it could start, Nancy Friedman reached out to Denise with a settlement offer. She'll agree to an uncontested divorce, Denise reported. You keep the house, the savings, everything. She'll waive spousal support and pay for half your legal fees. In exchange, you agree not to testify against her in the criminal case, and you sign an NDA about the details of the marriage and divorce. No, I said immediately. Daniel, think about this. You'd get everything you want financially, avoid a trial, move on with your life. And she gets away with what she did. She gets to hide the truth, rewrite the narrative however she wants, and face no real consequences. No. She documented every aspect of my life for years, analyzed me like a lab specimen, cheated on me while building a case against me. She doesn't get to buy her way out of accountability. Denise smiled slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. The divorce trial happened first, in February. Over 3 days, we presented our evidence to Judge William Thorne, a 30-year veteran of family court who'd seen everything. Melissa's attorney tried to frame the surveillance as concerned monitoring, the affair as a symptom of a failing marriage rather than a cause, the financial hiding as prudent personal planning. But the evidence was overwhelming. Patricia's forensic report detailed the illegal nature of the monitoring. Lucas's investigation showed the calculated timeline of the affair. James's data analysis proved that Melissa's documentation had been manipulated to support her narrative, and I testified for 6 hours about what it felt like to discover that my entire marriage had been a controlled experiment. Judge Thorne ruled decisively. I received the house, 80% of our savings, and a judgment against Melissa for the money she'd hidden. She was ordered to pay all legal fees and court costs. The judge's written opinion was scathing. The respondent's conduct represents not merely a betrayal of marital trust, but a systematic campaign of emotional abuse and illegal surveillance that shocks the conscience of this court. The criminal trial was faster. With the divorce record now public, and with Amanda Vaughn testifying about the coordinated nature of the affairs and planned divorces, the prosecution had an airtight case. Melissa's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Bennett wouldn't offer anything less than felony conviction and supervised probation. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for my legal fees in the criminal case. More importantly, she was now a convicted felon, which destroyed her professional reputation and made the business partnership with Richard untenable. I sat in the courtroom as the verdict was read, watching Melissa's carefully controlled facade finally crack. She'd spent years trying to optimize and control every aspect of our relationship, building cases and collecting data and planning her strategic exit. And in the end, her obsessive documentation had become the evidence that destroyed her. Richard and Amanda divorced around the same time, though his case was less dramatic since he hadn't committed any crimes, just standard adultery and betrayal. But his reputation in their industry was shattered. The company they'd planned to start together never materialized. Last I heard, they'd split up less than a year after both divorces were final. Turns out relationships built on betrayal and calculated manipulation don't have strong foundations. It's been 18 months now since I found that spreadsheet. I moved to a smaller house in a different part of Portland, somewhere with no memories attached. I changed jobs, got promoted, started rebuilding a life that belongs entirely to me. I've been in therapy with Dr. Fisher, working through the trauma of discovering that years of your life were a lie, that someone you loved saw you as a project to manage rather than a person to cherish. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering what Melissa would have rated various moments in my new life. Then I remind myself that I'm not a performance to be evaluated. I'm just a person, flawed and human and trying to build something authentic. James and I meet for lunch regularly now. Lucas became a friend, not just an investigator. Amanda and I talk occasionally, two people who survived similar betrayals and came out stronger. I'm not dating anyone yet. I'm not ready to trust someone with that level of access to my heart and life. But I'm not closed to the possibility someday. A few weeks ago, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was just, "I'm sorry." I deleted it without reading. Whatever Melissa had to say, whatever explanation or justification or plea for forgiveness she'd crafted, I didn't need to hear it. She'd said everything that mattered when she reduced our marriage to data points and performance metrics. I'm done being someone else's experiment, done being documented and analyzed and optimized. These days, I'm just trying to be human, messy and imperfect and gloriously unquantifiable. And for the first time in years, that feels like enough. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.